So this Torah portion, Noach, begins in Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. It goes over into chapter 11, the end of chapter 11. And this portion marks a very dramatic change in the history of mankind, and it's named after a man who was used by God to sustain God's plan for his creation. Were it not for Noah, were it not for his righteousness, were it not for his obedience to do what God called him to do, then theoretically anyway, none of us would be here today. So that's quite a responsibility that was placed upon him. His obedience, because of God, preserved the human race. And so it begins in Genesis chapter 6, verses 9 and 10. This is the genealogy of Noach. Noach was a just man, perfect in his generations. And Noach walked with God. And Noach begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So first of all, let's address the fact that he's called a just man. In Hebrew, the word is zadik, and I think most of you probably know what that word means. It simply means righteous. He was a righteous man. He did the right thing in spite of what everyone else may have been doing. And not only that, he encouraged others to do the right thing. Peter calls him a preacher of righteousness. And being a preacher of righteousness, he stands in very stark contrast to the culture in which he lived, because he was born into a very perverse generation, one that was characterized in the scripture as being violent and being corrupt. In fact, it says in verses 11 and 12, the earth also was corrupt before God. The very planet was corrupt, and the earth was filled with violence. And so God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt. And why? For all flesh had corrupted their way upon the earth. So the planet had become corrupt because men had become corrupt. And thus the offspring, as it were, of the earth corrupted that which they came from. And I would like to take the time to go into some ideas that popped into my mind in just that statement. But I'm not. It's just the idea that the offspring of the earth began to corrupt the very thing they come from. Think about it. But Noach was perfect in his generations, it says, and he walked with God. And the word that is translated as perfect, a word that we're all familiar with, tamim. It means undefiled. It means whole. It means lacking nothing. Noach is a man who did not mix and mingle with the culture as other sons of God had done. Now, at the risk of starting something that I do not want to, of course, in the last Torah portion, at the end of the Torah portion, there's this, this group of people called the Nephilim. The fallen ones. But I've long been of the mind that what's going on here, what's being described in the beginning of Genesis chapter 6, is how those Nephilim, those fallen ones, caused the sons of God to fall. Men of power, position, of influenced the very sons of God so that they began to mix and to mingle with things that were unclean, unholy, and perverse. And that's what just kind of created this situation where everything was becoming corrupt. And so only Noah was left as a righteous man and someone who was walking with God. Because by that time, apparently, the sons of God, not fallen angels, Jeremy, just tell them no. Not today. And for Midrash too, yes, just not today. A lot of the sons of God had already given into the temptation to take wives for themselves of all these beautiful women that they beheld. So, in other words, there was no widespread representation of righteousness in Noah's day. And so then the story of this generation that we read about in the Torah portion, it demonstrates the ripple effect of man's disobedience, and especially those who are considered to be the sons of God. If this world that we live in today cannot see a clear and definite example of righteousness and holiness and purity and all those things, then how is it going to happen? That's one of the reasons that we are here, to make sure that we are that light in the midst of the darkness, that city that is set upon a hill that cannot be hidden. We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be peculiar. Amen? But so it also demonstrates the far-reaching ramifications of those who will be faithful, who will stay true. And so Noah represents the remnant that is found in every generation. In every generation, there's always going to be those few who refuse to bow the knee to Baal. In every generation, from the very beginning of time, there's always been those that God could find. And apparently in this Torah portion, Noach was the only one who was considered to be righteous. In fact, I think it's kind of interesting that it doesn't say anything about his sons being righteous. It says that he was righteous. But because he was righteous, Noah and his family found grace. All of them found salvation because he was righteous. So it's kind of like when Lot was spared because of Abraham's righteousness. It's kind of like the firstborn of Israel was spared because their father obeyed the word of the Lord. It's like the Philippian jailer who was told, if you believe, you will be saved and your household. So Noah was a righteous man. He was tamim in his generations, which might mean compared to everybody else. It might mean that he was perfect in his generations when you considered everybody else, because everybody understands that he's just like us. He had flaws too. Does anybody remember anything that happened after he got off the ark? Okay, so obviously, even though he was a man who walked with God, he was not without some flaws. It just tells me that he, like us, is a person who was determined to walk the straight and narrow path, which means then, like us, he found that straight and narrow path to be as troublesome as you and I find it to be. Because like us, he got squeezed as well. I mean, how many of you have been told, now here's what I want you to do. I'm about to destroy everything, and I want you to build a ship. And it's going to be this long, this high, and this wide, and it's going to take you a while, so get at it. Is there anybody in this room that would go, is that you, Lord? Besides me? But he did it. He did what God asked him to do. He obeyed God, and as a result, he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. In fact, it's always been interesting to me that if you take the name Noach, which is Nun Chet, Noach, and you reverse those two letters, and it's Chet Nun, it's the word Chen, or grace. In other words, Noach's name is the word grace in just reverse order. All right, now I want you to think about something here. When God created Adam, and he formed him from the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, he placed him in a garden. And if you listen to me for any length of time, you've heard me say that I believe that the garden was the first earthly sanctuary. You've got Eden, the outer court, as it were. You've got the garden, the holy place, but you've got the midst of the garden where the tree of life was, which would correspond to the Holy of Holies, which then infers then that Adam was placed there to serve as a priest. And what does a priest do? Yes, he ministers unto God, but he also represents God to the people. So Adam was placed in that garden, in part anyway, to commune with God and then to teach his children and to teach others the ways of God. That's before Noah. After Noah, there comes a man by the name of Avram, introduced in this Torah portion, later called Avraham, and we know that he was called to basically perpetuate the same mission, to teach his children, to teach others, to be an example to others about the one and only God and his ways. In fact, this is what the Lord says of Abraham. Verse 18 of Genesis, I have known him, that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. So, in other words, from Adam and to Abraham, we see that part of their mission was to teach others, to be an example to their children, to be an example to others outside of their family. And then, of course, that would be perpetuated through the generations. So that brings me to this idea that Noah's purpose, one of the reasons that we read about him in the scripture, is that his life was to demonstrate the importance of walking with God and what it looks like to fear God rather than to fear men. To teach his children, to teach others what it means to reject culture's trend and culture's pull, to abstain from their idolatry, to abstain from their iniquity, and do what God has set before us to do, to be faithful in the little things, so that we can also be faithful in the greater things. And so like Adam before him, and like Abraham after him, Noah's purpose was to build something, not just an ark, but to build a testimony that is going to be perpetuated long after he's gone. Now, yes, of course, his purpose was to build something literal, an ark, a place of safety, a place of refuge. Might even say a sanctuary of sorts, just like Adam. And as a preacher of righteousness, it was to him to preserve the ways of God, to teach his family the ways of God, and thus sustain them and save them, to propagate the knowledge of the one true God to the next generation. His building project was about the future more than it was the present. I want you to think about that. Because we focus on the ark, how long it was, how high it was, and all those things are important. But what was the purpose? What was the function of it? It was to preserve the future. And so I don't think that this portion really emphasizes destruction as much as it does preservation and restoration, longevity. In other words, his life and his purpose was more about them rather than being about him. And by them, I mean his offspring, the generations that would come after, passing on to the next generation what it means to walk with God. The phrase, this is the genealogy of Noah, actually could be rendered as, this is the offspring of Noah. Again, just to highlight the idea that this isn't really about one man. This is about what one man built for the sake of others that would come after him. And that's something I want you to keep in mind throughout this morning as I share. This is about what happened after Noah. But it happened because Noah made his mind up to walk with God. We know that he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Just like all of us, his offspring, some of them pretty good, some of them, And maybe you're one of those families that they're all wonderful and they're all perfect, like mine. But the point is that his offspring were to be a reflection of who he was. They were not only his natural fruit, but they were reflections of the spiritual fruit that he produced. Because again, it wasn't just about the man Noah, it was about what come after. And again, at the end of this Torah portion, there is a man by the name of Abraham who came from Noah. So again, I want to suggest that one of the more important lessons in this portion is not so much about how things happen. Those things are important, but I want us to consider that, at least for today, our focus should be on why things happened the way they did. Why did things happen? Why was the earth so corrupt? And the answer is because men had corrupted their ways upon the earth. And that includes those who regarded themselves as being the sons of God. And if it happened then, it can happen now. Actually, what did the Messiah say? In the days leading up to his coming, it would be just like it was in the days of Noah, when men were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage. And so I have to conclude that in this day and time, those who are regarded as the sons of God are going to be led astray and tempted and seduced by things that are beautiful, things that are enticing, and they allow themselves to embrace things that God has said you need to be set apart from. So that's why the earth became so corrupt. And its lesson to us is we need to be a set apart people. Why did Noah find grace in the eyes of the Lord? And why is that important? So I want you to consider that his obedience in one phase of life, that is before the call to build the ark, before the flood, let's put it this way, just do the simple things, the things you know to do, and to be faithful in those things today, Noah. because he was 500 years old before God ever spoke to him about a flood, about an ark, or any of that. 500 years. 500 years of being challenged to do what is right when everybody else is falling into the pit of doing what's wrong or convenient. So it goes back to the idea of being faithful in the things that you know to do, being faithful in the little things. And then God looks upon a man who's been faithful all those years, and he says, I've got a mission for you. I've got a job for you because I can trust you. You have found grace in my sight. And so again, his obedience in one phase of life, that is before the call to build the ark, led to an opportunity to save many people. But that opportunity for God to use him so that other people might be saved required a lot more obedience. And it required that his faith be stretched even more so than it had. Because in my book anyway, Noach was chosen to do something that seemed very illogical, at least according to man. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. By faith, Noach, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, and prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness, which is according to faith. So he was warned of things not yet seen. God told him this is what's going to happen. And, I'm not going to get into all the nuts and bolts of this, but there are a lot of people smarter than I who believe that by that point in time, or at that point in time, it had not yet rained. And yet God's telling him this is what's going to happen. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me that Noah was a shipbuilder. And yet God's going to tell him to build a ship. And you're going to make it this long, this high, this wide, 3 decks, window here, all these different things. Because God told him of something that had not yet been seen. And it will be at least 100 years before he sees it. So all that time, he's got to be doing what God told him to do. He was warned of things not yet seen, yet he followed through on what he was told to do, and he did it with godly fear. And as a result, his family was saved. And it was as a result of his family being saved, then it made it possible for there to be men like Abraham, who by faith was regarded as righteous and who built something as well. What did Abraham build? A nation, a family of faith that we still look to as an example. And that thankfully, because of our faith in Messiah, we have been allowed to come into and become part of that family of faith. And so the baton has been passed to us to build something very similar to what they were asked to build. A haven, a place of refuge, a place where the righteous could be and then be equipped to go out and perpetuate this gospel of the kingdom throughout the entire world. So then, again, I think he was told to do something that may have seemed foolish at the time, but he did it because he was able to look beyond what he saw and to believe for what was not seen. And that is what motivated him to aspire to righteousness. It wasn't, I did this and I don't do that. He was able to see beyond what was visible. And he believed God, just like Abraham. He believed God. He was considered righteous. But I want you to also consider this. He was not just believing for his generation. Because of what God asked him to do, he was believing for the next generation. And so consequently, his faith and his obedience benefited people that he would never meet. I want you to think about that. How the obedience of one man benefited so many people, countless numbers of people that he would never meet because he made up his mind before the call to build the ark to walk with God, to do what was just, to do what was right, in spite of what was going on around him. When he was oblivious to the idea that there would be a flood, oblivious to the idea that he'd be called to do such a monumental thing, he was still walking in obedience to God. But because he did that, God said, I have something for you to do. And as he prepared that ark, he preached at least for 100 years. How successful was he? It depends on how you look at it, I guess. If we look at it in the way the world would look at it, he preached for 100 years, and only 8 people got on the boat, including himself, and the others were related to him. Some people would say that was very unsuccessful. However, again, in the long term, people he would never know are alive because of his obedience. And I would say that's very successful. Because in a sense, you and I are his offspring. This is the offspring of Noah. It's about the why these things happen. So if you're breathing, you should be grateful to Noah for his obedience. And when we get in the kingdom, let's make certain to thank him. All right? All right. I want you to also consider this. Noah was a man of destiny. And I know that some people don't like that word. Use whatever you want to use. But God brought him into the world for a specific purpose. In other words, he was born for such a time as this. Genesis chapter 5, verse 28 and 9. Lamech, his father, lived 182 years and had a son. And he called his name Noah, saying, this one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed. In other words, Lamech purposely named him Noah because he knew somehow or another that this son of mine was going to bring rest and bring comfort to the world. His name literally means rest. Perhaps you've heard the name Menachem. That name means comforter, but they're related. And so he's going to bring comfort. He's going to bring rest from this curse that has been placed upon the ground. But we also know that the ground had to be purged of the corrupt seed and all that corrupt fruit, and that's why there was a flood of waters. But if there was a flood of waters to kind of kill all that and rid the world of all that, then there had to be a remnant of good seed to go back into the earth, to replenish it, to preserve God's purpose in all this. The root from which we get the name Noah also means to stop movement. And I had to think about this for a little bit. It means it means rest, it means comfort, but the root word, the etymology of the word is it's something that stops something else from moving. And I thought about that. But then I thought this, the generation in which he lived was a corrupt generation, unbridled wickedness that continued to spread and permeate throughout the world. So is it, in part anyway, Noah's purpose, the reason he came into this world, that God was going to use him to put a stop to the spread of the corruption that was just spreading throughout the world. And if things are to line up in a parallel fashion with the days leading up to the return of the Messiah, as he said, as in the days of Noah, is it also possible that you and I have come into the kingdom for such a time as this? To be an upright people, to be people who walk with God and who live a set-apart life, and by our example and our influence on our children and our friends and our co-workers, that we can help put a stop to the spread of the wickedness that is so pervasive in our culture. Some people say, oh, that will never happen. Well, if you don't try, you're right. If we don't do what we are here to do, you're absolutely right. But greater is he who's in us than he who is in the world. And either that's true or it's not. And if it's true, then we need to start living like it's true and not be intimidated by the wickedness and all these things going on in the world, but be bold and try to put a stop to those things, at least in the realm that we're given to govern. Can anybody agree with me in that? So then, it seems to me part of his purpose anyway was to stop the spread of corruption. And he did that by being a just man, perfect in his generations, walking with God, and then providing a place of refuge for those God would use to sow righteousness back into the world after the flood. So I want to apply this idea to us. We know this. You and I are to remain unpolluted by the culture. Very hard to do. Would you agree? Because the culture has so many gateways into our lives. So many gateways into our lives. Some of you are looking at them right now. We are to be an unpolluted people, a set-apart people, and to walk upright before God. And so, if I may, because I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, I'm going to encourage all the parents and grandparents, do not concede to cultural whims just so that your kids can be normal. Well, I don't want them to be the oddball. I know what it was like growing up being the oddball and being the weirdo and all this kind of stuff. Don't give in to culture and what your kids think they just have to have because Joey's got one and Susie's got one and they do this and their parents let them do that. Well, I don't want my kids to be weird. I want them to be, normal. Normal in the eyes of the world may be rebellious in the eyes of God. We're to be a set-apart people. We are to be a peculiar people. That doesn't mean weird. It means set apart, different. We're not supposed to be like everybody else. If you're, I want to make certain I say this the right way. Let me think about how I'm going to say this. If you consider yourself a follower of the Messiah, that should be your mindset anyway. But if you're going to be part of this congregation, we're going to keep drilling that into you. That we're to be a set-apart people. We're not to be like everybody else. Everybody else might do it that way. We don't want to be copycats. Well, in this church they do it this way, in that congregation they do it that way. Good for them. But we're going to let the Father lead us in this congregation and let Him dictate what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it. Amen? Amen? Which means that we need to remain humble and broken before Him, always receptive to His word, which includes not only His direction and guidance, but it includes His correction and His reproof. Amen? So let's think of this in terms of prophecy. If we're living in the days of Noah, then the Lord is not going to spare the wicked of this time, nor its customs, nor its institutions. But He will deliver those who are just, righteous, those who are tamim, in spite of the corruption in which we live. In other words, He's looking for a remnant. He's looking for people who are cut from a different cloth, people who are set apart, who will live and who will preach righteousness, and who are willing to receive instruction to do something that it might seem illogical, monumental, beyond their grasp, but who will do it because they believe God. And they're pursuing righteousness, and they want to see that preserved, not just in their life, but in the lives of their children and in their grandchildren and beyond. They want to build something that goes beyond the right here and now. They want to believe God for the next generation. And so, our offspring, every generation, is depending on us. Noach is an example of that. One man's obedience had far-reaching effects on generation after generation after generation. Now, here's kind of a little sidebar here. And this never dawned on me until I went to the Ark thing in Kentucky. Have you ever considered how much work went on while they were riding on that Ark? I mean, there was a lot of work. A lot of things had to happen. They had to feed all of those animals. How do we know that? God tells them, bring on food for you, bring on food for the animals. There was a lot of work going on. And if there are a lot of animals and a lot of stalls and a lot of cages, that means there's a lot of stuff. So here's the point. Even times when God is delivering, preserving, perpetuating, preparing, doing all that great and wonderful stuff, even while he's doing that, there is other stuff that has to be dealt with. And thus it is written, where no oxen are, the crib is clean. But much increase comes by the strength of an ox. In other words, to get things done, good things, there have to be oxen. But with those oxen, there come certain byproducts. There come certain things that makes it necessary for those who are called into his service to clean up after. So here's what this means to me. Though Noah and his family were chosen by God to preserve the human race, I mean, does it get any bigger than that? I want you, Noah, to be the man that I use to preserve the human race. I'm on board, God. It's going to include going into that pen and cleaning up after that cow. It's going to include going into the pen and cleaning up after those lambs and those goats and all these other things and monkeys. Are you still on board, Noah? Because they were moved by faith to obey him. Just because they were called to some great, wonderful thing didn't mean that there wasn't a lot of work to do. And in fact, there was a lot of work, and a lot of it was menial, and a lot of it was messy, and a lot of it was smelly. There are some people who think that God's favor and God's purpose, it's demonstrated with ease and lack of trouble and difficulty. I mean, why are you having all these trials and things going on in your life if God has favored you? That's why. Because everybody that God, whether a person or a nation, God has placed his favor upon them. It comes with trials and tribulation. His calling goes hand in glove with trials. It goes with saving people, saving the human race, as it were, by preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Along with that comes cleaning out stalls. So then, if Noah was chosen to give rest for that generation and to do all the things that come along with that, I want to suggest to you that we too have been chosen, which also means to do all the things that come along with that. To be faithful in little things. Things that, I don't want to do this. This is menial. This is messy. This is stinky. I don't want to do this. I want to do the things that get all the attention and notoriety. You'll never do those things for God until you learn to clean out the stalls. To be faithful in it. So, like him, we've been called to do great things. And like him, we've been called to be faithful in little things. Like Noah, we have an appointment with destiny. And if so, we have a responsibility. So now I want you to consider what Paul has to say in regard to this issue in Romans chapter 8. He says the creation was subjected to futility. And I believe he's referring to the fact that the earth had become corrupt. But not willingly, he says, but because of him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. In other words, the creation's release from bondage is dependent upon the sons of God being revealed. Now, in the beginning, the sons of God, they saw these beautiful women. They took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. They intermarried, they mixed, they mingled. They corrupted themselves, and in corrupting themselves, they corrupted the very earth. And so the creation was subjected to this bondage, it says, not willingly. He subjected it in hope. But the release from that bondage, the fact that the creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now, Paul says, is the evidence that the creation wants to be released from that bondage. But the release from bondage for the creation is tied directly to the sons of God being revealed, to, if you will, reverse what happened in the beginning and be like Noach, to be the sons and the daughters of God who are just, who walk with God, who are striving for tamim, to be perfect without lacking nothing, to be the kind of people that find favor and grace in the eyes of the Lord, that he can say, because you've been faithful in these little things, I have chosen you to do great and wonderful things. So if we are living in the days of Noah, I believe we are, then we are a chosen generation. We are a people who have been presented with an incredible challenge to do great and wonderful things, not because we're great and wonderful people, but because he's a great and wonderful God who's merciful, long-suffering. And he looks for those who will be faithful in little things, to do what's right when everybody else is doing what's wrong. A people who will be his own special people, that peculiar treasure, and who will proclaim the praises of him who's called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. And so we've been given a task, just like Noah, to do things that are not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of others, and many who we will never meet in this world. And so if we're going to do that, then we also have to be like Noah, in that we have to move with godly fear. Been saying for a while now, off and on, we could all use a good dose of godly fear. Something in my gut feels like things are going to happen. I don't know when, but soon enough, it's going to instill fear in the hearts of men. And I hope that for you and I, that we're not, I want to say this the right way, we're not shaken by that if we've taken the time now to make certain that we build everything we're building on the rock, on the things that'll stand. We've been given a kingdom that cannot be shaken, right? And yet we must move in everything we do with godly fear, having faith in what he has said to us, to me as an individual, to you, to your family, to this congregation. And on that note, I want to read something that's actually recorded in sections of the Haftarah for this week that he has said to us. Isaiah 54, verses 2 through 4. Here's what he said to Isaiah, through Isaiah. And we believe that he has said this to us. Enlarge the place of your tent. Let them stretch out the curtains of your dwellings. This is the Haftarah for this Torah portion now. Do not spare. Lengthen your cords and strengthen your stakes. I want to emphasize that phrase right there for just a moment. Strengthen your stakes. Make sure they're going to hold. Make sure it's solid. Strengthen your stakes, for you shall expand to the right and to the left. And your descendants, here's that next generation, your children, your grandchildren shall inherit the nations. You do today what you're supposed to so that the next generation can do what I've called them to do and possess the land that I've given to them. It might be that some of us are old enough now that some of these things that we've longed to see, maybe we won't. But we still do the things that he's called us to do because our children and our grandchildren are coming right behind us. And we need to make sure that we do today the things that are given to us so that they will be well equipped to do the things that God has called them to do. Because what we're doing today is not just for our benefit. It's for the benefit of generations to come. If the Lord tarries, for your grandchildren's grandchildren. Anyway, your descendants will inherit the nations and make the desolate cities inhabited. Things that have dried up and died and just faded away, they will bring them, God will use them to bring them back to life. And then he says, do not fear, for you will not be ashamed, neither be disgraced, for you will not be put to shame. How many of you believe that the Lord has said that to us? I do. Is anybody? Let's see. Let's see. I'm just seeing. No, you really believe it. Don't just raise your hand just because you want to be normal. But you really believe that. All right? If you believe that, then we have to walk in that. We have to move with godly fear, believing for something that we cannot see. And why? Because if we're trying to do his will, then we have to understand that it's not just about us today, it's about what he's going to do tomorrow and the next day. We're looking ahead. A couple other thoughts I have about this Torah portion. Are y'all still awake? You're still with me? It occurs to me that in this particular Torah portion, there are basically two kinds of building projects. The ark and the tower. In Genesis 6, verses 13 through 15, the Lord said to Noach, make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, cover it inside and outside with pitch, and this is how you shall make it. This building project, God comes to his man. He says, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to do it. He's very specific, gives him details about it. Make sure you do it exactly that way. And if you do it the way I'm telling you to do it, it will survive, life will be preserved, and my purpose will be fulfilled. That's one building project. The other one is recorded for us in Genesis chapter 11, beginning in verse 3 and 4. They said to one another, come and let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come and let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. There's lots of problems in those verses we just read. Because God had told Noach and his sons to spread out, fill the earth. But what is Nimrod and these guys doing? Let's come together lest we be scattered abroad. And so these two different projects, one is led by a man of faith, by people of faith, and the other is organized by rebels. There's one project that's dedicated to the glory of God and another project that is dedicated to the glory of men. There is one that is for the benefit of others, and the other is self-serving. There are those who are building in order to advance God's purpose, and then there are those who are building to resist God's purpose. There are those who are motivated by godly fear, and then there are those who are motivated by pride and arrogance. Don't think that's an accident. Long ago, I did a teaching message, whatever you want to call it, about two ships. And in both cases, those two ships were in their day and time considered to be the greatest ship of their era. And the first ship is the ark. The other ship in this parable that I present is the Titanic. One stayed afloat. And because it stayed afloat, it preserved life. One sank and destroyed hundreds of lives. One was jeered at by those who saw it, and one was acclaimed as unsinkable. In fact, one guy told this one lady that, Madam, God himself could not sink this ship. And so the ship that couldn't sink, sank, whatever the proper grammar is there. You get the idea? It went to the bottom of the ocean. Okay? One was built by someone who demonstrated humility and godly fear. The other by pride and arrogance. And so we see which one works and which one doesn't. There's several different ways that we can apply this to our individual lives, to our families, to congregation. Let's make certain that we're not building anything out of pride and arrogance and for selfish reasons. Let's make sure that we are humbly moving in accordance with His plan, His purpose, and staying true to His blueprint, the pattern that He set before us, down to each and every detail. And I hope that He will always give us the keenness to clearly hear His voice, because it gets noisy, doesn't it? And all these different voices and all these different sounds coming at you. And sometimes I feel like I'm really straining to hear. But I pray that He'll always give us the ability to discern His voice from among the others. And I pray that He will just continue to give us all the courage to obey His voice. Because a lot of things, most things He tells us, our flesh does not want to do. And so we need the courage to do what He's called us to do. That is every instruction, and then the wisdom to carry out His plan all the way to the end. And so then there's one last thought I want to share. And this includes His people, but all of mankind has been given a space of time to turn back to Him and to turn back to His ways. Because there is a day when the ark's door closes. And when it closes, no one will be able to open it. But in that same vein of thought, I want you to consider that Noach, the man of God, was given specific instructions and was given a set time to fulfill those instructions. Most think it's about 100 years. Some say it's 120. Whatever it was, there was a specific time that he was given from the moment the call came, I want you to build an ark. This is what I want you to do. He was given a set time to do it. So then it was important that he moved with godly fear and that he moved with haste. That he was, diligent about it because he had a window of opportunity that was open. I want you to hear what I'm saying here. All of us, in whatever God has called us to do, there's a certain amount of time that He gives us to prepare for that. Now, we may not realize it at the time that we're preparing for something other than what we're doing at that moment. It's like we've said before, Daniel-san, wax on, wax off. And we do a lot of that thinking, what is all this about? I'm tired of this. Remember, be faithful in little things. Be diligent in your faithfulness to those things because God's watching, God's paying attention. Who's going to do these little things? Things that they don't get any attention for or recognition for. We got to be faithful. But He prepares us for these things. And so Noach was given that time to prepare this ark. And by faith, he was motivated. And as he's building this ark, at this point in the story, or until a certain point in the story, we presume he does not know exactly when the flood is going to come. He just knows that it's coming. He just knows that day is coming. I don't know when, so he's continually building the ark. However, in the Torah portion, it tells us that 7 days before the flood came, God told him exactly when it was going to start. So here's my point. At that point, he had 7 days to complete everything and get everybody in the ark. So it was crucial then that he had made the most of the time that he had been given before that. There was no time to waste. There was no day to just say, I don't feel like it today. Every day had to be spent, Father, what is your will today? As I am undertaking this project, what is it I'm supposed to do? How sad it would have been if when the call came, you have 7 days that he had to run out and buy oil. Where's that in the story? You'll figure it out, right? Ask somebody, okay? They'll tell you. Do you understand what we're trying to say here? We've all been given that preparation time, that time to get things the way they should be, doing the things that we know to do so that we can be in the right place at the right time. So this demonstrates then that God gives us instruction. He gives us time to prepare as we need those instructions. We want to see the whole big old picture. He never does that, ever, right? What did he tell Joseph? Your brothers are going to bow down to you. Your father and mother, they're going to bow down to you. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. He left out the pit and the exile and the prison and all that kind of stuff. Didn't tell him that part, right? He leaves those kinds of things out, doesn't he? But he gives us time to prepare. If you're like me, you probably feel like all your life, all these other things that you've done have just been simply preparing for something that you can't quite put your finger on just yet. But when it does happen, it happens quickly. In fact, Noah had 7 days. He had all this prep time, 100 years. But when it came right down to it to execute these things, he had 7 days. Why is it that we are simply on a need-to-know basis? Why doesn't he tell us the whole thing? Because there's this word called faith. But that faith should provoke us to do the things that he set before us that we know to do, to act on. Even if we can't see how this comes together, we do it. And much of what we've been doing, ladies and gentlemen, has been in preparation for, we'll call it the big event, whatever that is. Whatever we're placed here to do. So then, when it's time for what God has ordained to occur, it happens quickly. Habakkuk said this, though it tarries, it will surely come, and then it will not tarry. Genesis chapter 7, verse 7, Noach went into the ark because of the waters of the flood. In other words, it implies that he is entering the ark as the waters of the flood are beginning to fall from the heavens, as the fountains of the great deep are being broken up, maybe even forcing them into the ark. Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, it says that the flood began on the 17th day of the second month, and it was on that very day that Noach and his family entered the ark. And so the point is this. We need to make sure that when the time comes for God's purpose to come to pass, that we're in the right place, in the right time, in the right attitude, and that we are equipped and we are prepared to enter the door. Because if we have to run around and do the things that we should have already done, by the time we get back, the door might be shut. Again, a lot of scenarios that we can apply this to, whether it's personal, whether it's family, whether it's congregation. And again, I want to be very adamant that I think all of us should apply it in every way. Me personally, my family, this congregation. So let's make certain that we're hearing his voice. Let's make sure that we are heeding his voice. I don't know what Noah was doing the day that the instruction came, okay, Noah, I'm going to destroy the whole world. I'm going to destroy everything in it. And I want you to build an ark. And this is how you're going to build it. Who knows what he was doing? But I have to think that he was just like, whoa, now. What? But he heard, and he heeded, and he moved with godly fear. Let's do the same. I know that we have people in this congregation and the people who join us online that come from all different backgrounds in terms of spiritual backgrounds, their walk, different denominations, you know. And I know that some are not as accustomed to others to through servants, the Lord speaking directly to his people. And I know for some that, again, in their background, that may not have been very common. Maybe until you got here, you never experienced that before in your life. I don't know. But we have a book that is full of examples of the Lord speaking specific things to his people and what they are to do, how they are to do it. And if he did it then, he does it now. So the Lord has been speaking to this assembly through the years. And if you've been here any length of time, you know he's been speaking to us. And in such a way that after some time goes by, you might forget about it, or you might, well, that didn't come about when I thought it should, or how I thought it should. But he's still speaking those same things. But here recently, it seems to me, and this is what I feel in my gut, it's becoming more intense and it's becoming more frequent, which tells me that we are getting closer to something that he really wants to do. And I do not want that door of opportunity to close because we got lazy or got distracted by this, that, and the other. Do you hear what I'm saying? You can applaud, shout, whatever you want to do, but listen to what I'm saying. We need to be very attentive to what the Lord is instructing us to do, because it's not just about us. If he has established this congregation, it's not just for the old folks. It will be here when the old folks are gone. And there'll be another generation to carry forward into this region and this world the things that he is going to do in the earth. He is going to have a remnant.